In this episode of the Bannerlord Battlefield Tactics Guide, we will look closely at how shock troops and skirmisher infantry work. By the end of the video, you will know which formations and orders performs best for each unit. There's a lot to cover here, so let's begin. We start with shock infantry, which are units who lack a shield and often wield a two-handed sword or polearm for massive damage. For the testing, we will use the Tier 5 Empire Shock Troop, also known as the Manavlian. This mirror matchup starts with line and hold ground, but results in a pretty sound defeat. At only 9% win rate and 0.9 KDR, it's not recommended to leave them on hold ground. Next up, the true mirror match. Line charge versus line charge. In this battle, we see a close struggle until the point of morale breaking, which we saw in the previous guide as well. We ran enough tests to get a good distribution of results, a 1 KDR and close to 50% win rate. With our baseline set, let's test Advance. Advance pulls off to an early lead but gives it back and then some. I'm not sure what causes the Advance to lose handedly, but at 0.83 KDR and 10% win rate, it's not recommended to use for actual combat. It can help keep the formation together before the lines meet though. When using line formation for shock troops, be sure to use the charge command frequently. Standing ground is the worst and should be avoided. Now we move on to shield wall formation. While Manavlian don't use shields, they are still affected by the formation. For stand ground, we see a large lead open up early for the other side, which only gets worse. Our line was easily flanked, causing a landside loss with 0 wins and 0.73 KDR. Testing again with a longer line, we see much better results. Our longer line is able to flank their line as it stretches out, resulting in 0.97 KDR and a 40% win rate. For the charge command, we see a fairly close battle on the left flank, but lose both middle and right. Looking at the numbers, we see a 0.98 KDR and 56% win rate, which is close to even. Advanced shield wall starts off well, but loses on the flanks and does not adjust. At 0.61 KDR and 0% win rate, it's the worst of the three. To recap, only use charge while in a shield wall formation with shock infantry, and avoid the other two at all costs. Like the previous guide, we won't spend much time looking at loose formation as all three are bad. The back row doesn't engage until it's too late, resulting in a 0.83 KDR and 10% win rate. Charge produces slightly better results for KDR at 0.88, but still 10% win rate. And Advance is great for farming medicine with massive losses, 0.71 KDR and 0% win rate. Looking at the recap, we can confidently see that loose formation should be avoided no matter the situation. Now we get down to business. Circle formation. Like before, we first test while holding ground the whole time. The battle starts off okay and the formation holds for longer than others, but they punch through the middle and everything quickly falls apart. At only 0.62 KDR and 0% win rate, it's not a good idea to use without extra help. Next, we test by adding in the charge command. One key here is to wait until all of the enemy troops have committed to the wall, which happens right here. If we give the order too soon or too late, it will result in a heavy loss the majority of the time. With micro, we achieve 1.21 KDR and 100% win rate. Looking at both results, it's quite obvious that using micro is the only way to use this formation, but it also needs to be timed right. Next up, my favorite, square formation. We see very similar results as circle with a very slow and steady loss with the formation being eaten from the inside out. At 0.84 KDR and 0% win rate, it's only slightly better than circle, but still not ideal. Repeating this test with the charge micro, we see that familiar swinging arms and a fleeing enemy. It's still 100% win rate, but at 1.12 KDR, it's slightly less effective than circle formation. Again, if we use square formation, we must babysit and micro the charge command for it to work. In the previous testing, we saw great things from Skein formation, which we fully expect to see again here. Starting with Skein formation and holding ground, we see our middle quickly falling, but our flanks holding strong. We see consistent 0% win rate and 0.78 KDR using this combination. Switching over to charge, we quickly flank the enemy on both sides and dominate them. At 1.43 KDR and 100% win rate, it's the best we've seen so far. While I don't have high hopes for Advanced Command, I also was not expecting it to hold out as long as it did. Both the middle and the flanks held until the near end, resulting in 0.78 KDR and 0% win rate. It's still not good to use though. Looking at the recap, the charge command is clearly the best of the bunch, while standing ground and advancing should be avoided at all costs. Last episode we memed a bit about column formation, but I did some more playing around and found this interesting method. This can be useful for those times when the enemy forms a circle formation and doesn't budge. I call it the Anaconda. We end up with 1.65 KDR, which outperforms even the Skein formation, although I do think its use is very situational. Rather than remembering all of the formation combinations for shock troops, I think it's best to recap the section with this. Be sure to always outflank your enemy at all costs. The formations that do best are the ones that naturally move to the flanks. Now for a strat gaming first. Let's do a short bonus section before we move on to the skirmisher testing. I was curious to see which unit would perform better, the Legionary or the Manavlian. We start the test with line versus line charge. The Legionaries very quickly jump ahead to a massive lead and stomp the Manavlians for a 0.47 KDR. I was a bit shocked, no pun intended, because I thought the shock troops would perform better. It's possible that they need a bit more protection, so let's try to mix in Legionary troops to soak up some damage. Not much changes here, it's another stomp unfortunately. Both units have around 110 kills each, so neither outdid the other for a total KDR of 0.54. Finally, let's split up into groups. Our Legionaries hold the center in circle formation and the Manavlian on the wings, ready to pounce when the enemy commits. Once they reach our circle, we move our flanks into position and charge. The Manavlian make good contact and our center mostly holds. In the end, it still was not good enough to get a win. The Manavlian did achieve more kills, but this is expected considering our Legionary were fighting outnumbered for a while at the start. We get all the way up to a 0.84 KDR this time, or a 55% increase with this tactic over a straight charge. For the next section, we will run the testing a bit differently. Skirmisher Infantry strength lie in their ability to kill from a distance, with melee being a backup option. Thus, we will test mostly Javelin duels. To start, we use the Stygian Woodsmen because they have no shields, and we can get an accurate test for which formation and orders work best for ranged kills. We use line and hold formation against line and charge. The first thing to notice here is that the charging line throws their javelins well ahead of the line holding ground. It seems the range is extended with a charge. This head start allows that side to tip the scales in their favor, resulting in an easy victory. Looking at the results, we see a 0% win rate for the hold ground and a 15% deficit in kills. Charge is significantly better than holding ground. Next, we move into shield wall formation and holding ground against the same line charge. Once again, the charge throws their volley first, gaining an edge over the holding group. However, the casualties are much greater than with line. The end result is the same, 0% win rate for the shield wall, but a better KDR at 0.6. This is because shield wall squeezes more troops into the same space, allowing more of our troops to throw their javelins. Time to dish out some pain. We switch to loose formation and let them come in. Their numbers are cut in half before reaching our lines, and we easily clean the rest up in melee. At more than 2-to-1 KDR, it's obvious this is the only way to use Skirmisher Infantry. In the previous tests, we only tested the charge command versus hold ground. Let's look at two examples of both sides holding ground to see how powerful loose formation is. Starting with line formation. It's quite apparent that loose formation is the way to go, but at 0.67 KDR, using the charge command yielded better results. Finally, we test shield wall versus loose. Notice again, the shield wall performs better than line formation because more troops are throwing javelins in the same amount of space, but can't keep pace with loose formation. At 0.74 KDR, it's clearly an improvement, but loose formation is still king. For the final section, we need to look closely at shielded skirmisher infantry since the majority of skirmisher units in Bannerlord use a shield as well. For this test, we will use the Stygian Heavy Axemen. We place our units in shield wall and hold fire, then give the move command. The enemy is in loose and will throw all of their javelins. We want to know how many units will survive the barrage before reaching the enemy lines. It's a tremendous hail of javelins, but they only managed to knock out 2 of our troops. Now we give our line permission to release their javelins. There are a few scattered casualties, but only 6 in total. This is hardly an effective strategy. Now let's test what happens when both groups are allowed to throw at the same time. Both sides exchange volleys, with our line taking more casualties due to the volume of javelins being thrown our way. By the end, we end up with with 85 casualties and they end up with 67. Now instead of using line formation, we switch to shield wall, which should provide more defense and a slight increase to offense. Right away we see a better defense from our shield wall. The casualties are still light, but by the end our shield wall took 39 casualties to their 60. Shield wall not only decreased losses, but it increases inflicted casualties as well. I know this next test wasn't necessary, but I really wanted to see how much carnage two loose formations would inflict on each other. Sometimes we need to have a little fun too. To my surprise, there were less casualties here than in shield wall. So it's clear now that throwing javelins at any unit equipped with a shield is a waste of potential. Let's see how much damage throwing javelins from the side of a unit can do. Using loose formation, we set up on the flank of this infantry unit and let the javelins loose as they march. We inflict some casualties while throwing from the front and side, but the real damage happens when the formation passes further away, allowing for some rear flank. A gaping hole has formed in their right side and a quick charge would easily finish the rest off. Now for the ultimate, a rear flank. We position ourselves behind the poor souls and let loose a terrific volley of javelins. By the end, they are left with only 160 troops, or 32% of what they started with. Now there's only one more aspect to test. How effective are javelins at different ranges? This time we swap out the enemy with Manavlians, who have good armor but no shields. Starting from max range, we let loose a few javelins with very little effect. Our Lake Rats have 10 javelins each, and the front two rows released all of them, resulting in only 2 casualties. Moving up to medium distance, we see a significant increase in casualties inflicted, eventually causing the enemy to rout. Let's test slightly closer and with a full set of javelins this time. Again, we see massive damage and the enemy routs within 6 volleys. I don't want to ruin this next section by talking, so I'll shut up now. It actually took the same 6 volleys to cause a rout. It seems like the first volley did significantly more damage, but the subsequent ones did a bit less. I'm not really sure why, but it's quite obvious the closer you are, the better your skirmishers will do. Now for my favorite part. Bonus time again. We start by testing our heavy Axemen against the Empire Legionary. Will loose formation provide enough damage output to sway the battle towards the Sturgians? They start off strong with a solid wall of green from a point-blank javelin volley. But as the battle wears on, the Legionary cannot be matched, leading to their eventual victory. It's reasonably close though at 0.86 KDR. Let's try the same battle but with a detachment unit of 200 to help flank from the rear. The main line is really struggling to hold while our javelins move into position. Some decent volleys are thrown, but as soon as the legionaries turn their shields, it's game over. The results are worse than before at 0.61 KDR. This demonstrates the biggest issue with rear flanks. Oftentimes the battle is over before we can even get into position. How about we attempt this with a bigger map, giving a better opportunity for maneuvering? We split into the same 2 groups, but this time we set our front line to loose formation and give the fallback command. This allows them to loose javelins, give some ground, and buy more time for our flank to get into position. Our main line has only managed to kill 15 troops, not quite what is needed. As the enemy reaches our line, we switch from fallback to charge and quickly rush the flanking force in. The AI pulls a 1000 IQ moment and sends a few troops with shields in our direction, both distracting our troops and absorbing damage away from the main group. While we did come up short here, the results were an improvement from the last test, 0.86 KDR. If you recall from the previous bonus, we came up with this center circle and 2 flank formation. Let's try it again, but this time we will throw javelins before we engage in melee combat. We wait for the enemy to make contact with our center, ensuring that no shields are turned to meet our flanking forces. We pour a devastating amount of javelins into the enemy, switching our center formation into a charge, and then switching both flanks to a charge once they use their ammunition. The enemy breaks and flees, resulting in a 2.21 KDR victory. This is by far the way to go. For the next bonus section, we will test our javelins against the best foot archers in the game, the Battanian Fian champions. In order to establish a baseline, let's test melee only on both sides. It's very quickly obvious that melee combat against Fian champions is a bad idea, resulting in 0.55 KDR. Now let's test loose formation and hurl javelins at them. The AI keeps sending 20 units ahead for some reason, even though I told them to hold, giving us a slight advantage here. We move into position, but the constant arrows are proving to be a real challenge, even with our shields. We are able to release a few javelins, but the end result is quite bad, 0.37 KDR. I'm not convinced any fancy formations are gonna help here. Let's just try to brute force our way in. Loose formation and charge. The first volley has some effect, but the second seems to clear an entire row. By the time our line meets, they have lost over 100 troops. We may be outmatched in melee, but our numbers are too much and we rout the enemy. We were able to achieve a 1.39 KDR here. For the final bonus section, let's test how effective our javelins are against moving cavalry. We set up our main force in loose formation and have the enemy cavalry parade in front of our lines. 38 horse archers are taken out on the first pass, or roughly 8%. Only 28 are knocked out on the second pass, and in the final pass, 45 more horses are eliminated. It seems that a fair number of our javelins are hitting horses instead of the riders, helping soak up the damage. Now let's flip the tables and see how long these skirmishers can hold up against Imperial Bucularii circling around the outside. In case you missed it before, this formation can be done by setting horse archers to column formation, then issuing the follow me command and riding in a circle around the enemy. It's not looking pretty for the skirmishers. They're either missing with their javelins or are interrupted from throwing by incoming arrows. In the end, only a 0.11 KDR on the skirmisher side. Clearly sitting back in formation is not going to work against horse archers. Now we test our skirmishers against the tier 5 Keshig, 500 versus 500. To get a baseline, we issue the charge command using loose formation. Not only are our javelins effective, but the charge has caused some horses to run through our lines and get cut down. The problem arises once all javelins have been used up. Some of their horses continue to run through our lines, but mostly we are sitting ducks and getting whittled down to nothing. We're able to rack up a 0.85 KDR, which actually isn't bad. Next, we split 200 troops to hold position in front, saving 300 troops in the rear as a reserve. Once they reach our circle, they will round off behind, allowing us to charge in and squish them in between our two lines. Apparently, we do such a good job that the majority of their troops run off. I guess morale in custom battles is extremely low. Let's try again to make sure it was not a fluke. Once the trap is sprung, we switch our front circle to loose formation and give them the charge order as well. The enemy lasts a little bit longer but still run very early. While this was not a complete battle, it does prove the formation is being viable. Let's repeat these tests, but against the dreaded Consguard. The first battle, loose charge, goes about as well as one would expect, only 0.31 KDR. We repeat the process again using the split groups. This time we issue the charge command from our front line much sooner, not giving the Consguard enough time to fit through the gap. We slowly push them back up into the mountains and inflict heavy damage. It's a brutal slugfest with both sides trading evenly. We even have a 20 unit lead near the end, but our morale breaks first and we lose. We did manage to rack up a 0.91 KDR, which is not bad considering the matchup. And finally, because we need to get revenge on these OP Consguards, we stick them in the small map and order the charge. The shields are working very well against an enemy directly in front of us. As the lines meet, we hold a nearly 150 troop advantage thanks to our devastating javelin volleys. We have just enough to eke out a win over the Consguards. Leave a like if you enjoyed watching the Consguards get shredded to bits. Up next, we look at foot archers in great detail. Let me know in the comments what surprised you most in these tests. Thank you for your time, and I'll see you on the next one.